Much, Ivan, for giving us an update on what is happening in Kapchorwa. No posters allowed there. However, the question is, in a time when we are having scientific elections, posters are the only way to actually communicate with your audience, with your voters, with the citizens. At the time like this, why are we stopping posters happening there? But these are some of the questions that we would like to put to different stakeholders of this election period. And as we speak, the campaigns have started, and you know for a fact by now that the presidential elections will happen on the 14th of January. And this morning also I want to pick the thoughts of the Executive Director of Citizens Coalition on Electoral Democracy in Uganda, that is a Charity Ahimbisiwe, on this and so much more. Welcome to Morning at NTV.
Good morning, and good morning to our viewers.
Well, first and foremost, I know you were already curious on why the posters are not there. Let's start from there before we forget. Yeah.
Yes, I was curious about the posters because this is a contactless election. It is an election that is more conscious about COVID-19. And so people can only put out their messages using posters and flyers, clever ways of reaching the population. Now, if the posters are also not there, it means the information is hardly reaching the voter. So how do the voters decide on who is going to be the member of parliament? How do they know who is standing as a councillor?
But you had them say they already know.
They know their president.
Yes.
They know their president, which is okay. But they don't know who is their member of parliament. Did they tell us the member of parliament? No. Because there are so many constituencies. There is a woman MP there. Then there is the full member of parliament, and then there are also the local government elections. You know, those nominations ended and they have been in campaigns. So how does the voter tell who is standing for which position and who has an age and what is their message? Are they just going to vote out of beautiful or wish?
Impressionable, who appeals to them?
So that poster story, it needs to go around the whole country. Let's see what is happening in other places. So for Kapchorwa, what are they premising on? Is it the local government act that is saying you cannot hang posters? Because you see, elections are the law. It is the law that defines what is done. And when we are assessing as observers, we assess based on the law that governs the processes. And we assess the process of transparency based on that, on fairness based on that, justice, equity. When we say there is no equitable access to information, we would begin to judge Kapchorwa as one of the places.
Because it is limiting that.
Yeah.
Well, also just to pick your thoughts on the issues that happened on Tuesday. Monday was entirely peaceful, and still we saw some of the supporters of the incumbent president really on the roadside waiting for him, you know. But Tuesday, it was a different story for two presidential candidates, especially Bobi Wine and Patrick Oboy Amuriat. What are your thoughts? Do you feel like the citizens' rights in this moment were violated in the nomination days?
So when we observed the first day of nominations, you saw a lot of calm out there, and the president was allowed to get into Nambole peacefully with his entourage, and they got out. And we also observed the young people from Nakasero through golf course and down to Munyonyo. And they were not intercepted even as they drove through town, and they were excited. Some of them sat on motorbikes and celebrated their candidate. And so while I appeared on a show that evening with the police, I told them I hope tomorrow
it's going to be the same.
You do the same for the other candidates. Because in an election, you must not be seen to be biased if you are a state institution. You must be seen to facilitate a process of fairness and a process of justice for everybody, because there's what we call electoral justice.
Yes.
Everybody to participate and everybody to feel included. Because when you went into a multi-party dispensation, it means that the thought processes of everybody are different. What you think about the various candidates, you had one here, I don't know whether he convinced you too well with the era of love, or you have another candidate that you might have in mind. But you are entitled to support who you choose to support. So the first day, we saw General Muntu being escorted by the lead motorbikes up to his place. I followed that motorcade until Nakasero, next to St. Catherine's Clinic. That's where his office is. And there were 95 people seated in the compound, socially distanced, with balloons celebrating, blowing vuvuzelas, and there was no police, no issue, and he was led from Chambogo up to there. There is nobody who whisked him off into a police van. And he had a few of his supporters who also went flashing their hands. They kept doing this across the road. General Tumukunde also came into Nakasero near the lawns, Malt Choice, and he had no problem, and he moved very easily, and the process went on quite well.
No disruptions at all.
No disruption. Now, day 2. I kind of think that because the supporters of Bobi Wine and the supporters of presidential candidate Patrick Amuriat had said, we are going to defy everything. We are not going to pay attention to those guidelines. So the police was more on the alert for these two groups of people, because FDC put out a statement, a short one, where they said the minimum number of people who will have is 2,000. So we agree we are in a COVID-19 election, and that having big numbers is going to be difficult. And it is true, COVID is killing people. We have also, as said, we wrote a policy framework, and we agree about COVID. But how do you treat a fellow human being? Do you carry them like a small bird and drop them at a nomination center without shoes and get them to walk, and you think they're presidential candidates, and you've not stripped them of their dignity? What does a human rights-based approach talk about? A human rights-based approach talks about respecting a human being as one. And so when the president assented to the Human Rights Enforcement Act, in essence, that's what he was saying. He was saying to the police, whenever you go out there and you commit human rights abuses, you're on your own. It is you who has to pay for it, because you've not respected the rights of that citizen. And he understood that in a human rights perspective, there must be respect and dignity for human rights. And when he assented to the Anti-Torture Act, a lot of torture had been going on in Uganda. If you look at the electoral process of Uganda from 2001, Besigye was always in and out with police, his supporters fighting police. If you count the number of deaths that occurred from 2001, 2011, 2006, 2016, because of elections, you'll be shocked. And so when we released the statement we released yesterday, when we saw what was happening on day 2, bloodshed, young girl shot in the middle of her head, that is uncalled for in an election. It is a civil matter. Article 38 says civilians will engage in issues to govern them. So it is a civil matter, it's not a security matter. What was the point of whisking off Bobi Wine immediately after leaving the nomination ground? Supposing the police had surrounded him with big motorcades all around him with their big tankers and drove just around him up to Magere, would those young people have shot back at those tankers when they are seeing serious tankers and red top everywhere? Would it have been the same thing? Now, you see, when you start to whisk up somebody, then they say to an unknown area, they are in.
That causes tension.
Exactly. And an electoral process is already a tense process.
But also, you already mentioned how the other presidential candidates had walked, driven peacefully to their offices, and Bobi Wine equally wanted to do that as well, to get to his office in Kamocha and actually talk about his manifesto deeply, and that was stopped. What do you make sense of it? Does this even make sense to you? Do you think it was on the issue? Because some would say it is to protect the citizens or to protect them from, you know, having a bigger situation escalating, stopping him from getting to his office to speak about his manifesto.
I think that was not fair. In all fairness, I think that was not fair, because all the other presidential candidates had gone to their offices and had launched their manifestos. And he also had people who were waiting for him at his office. What the police needed to have done is to establish were the people socially distanced, were they wearing masks, did they have sanitizer, the SOPs in place, and were they equal to 70, because that's what the guideline of the Electoral Commission says. So that's all they were supposed to establish. They were supposed to enter inside the Kamocha office, see, are there 70 people? If more than 70, then that's where the problem would start, because they would say, now we are raising an issue. The guideline says 70. But you are 100 or you're 200. Mm-hmm. That is why we can't let you. Because you're explaining to people who also have brains. They understand. So if you tell them you're 100 and the guideline says 70, then we understand. We can say, oh, on a ground of justice, these people are saying something which is correct. But we didn't even get to know who was inside. Were they socially distanced? Were they seated very well? What was exactly taking place there? But in other spaces, we saw the social distancing and we saw people going on, we saw the songs going on, we saw the speeches going on and the launching going on. So I think it was extremely unfortunate, and the police should come out to apologize to the Ugandans who especially were tortured, those who have wounds on their bodies, those whose suits were torn, like my friend Joel Senyonyi, and he just became a public spectacle.
But also maybe just to pick your thoughts, you know, when Bobi Wine was taken to his home, given a bit of a home arrest, you could tell that even when he was speaking to them, there was no social distance at all. So there's also that aspect of, say, even a presidential candidate like Bobi Wine should be able to direct his own audience and say, we are in a tough time, COVID-19 is killing people, because it really is killing people.
Yes, it is.
But there was no social distance, even when he was speaking to his people in Magere. What exactly do you have to say about, what are your thoughts on that? I saw him, he was speaking to his congregation, to his voters, but there was nothing, even the people around him, from himself actually to Louis Rubongoya, to Joel Senyonyi, to all the people that were surrounding him, they did not have masks on. What does that speak for us as we enter a very tense period of the 2021 elections?
I think that is also not proper, okay? Because as an arbiter, you must see what is correct and what is not correct. Yes. That's also not proper. And I tried to encourage the young people, even when I met them on the various radio talk shows. I spoke to them and said, you see, it's not about just shouting and saying, we will do this as we want. This has been a carefully thought out process, and let us agree we are in a COVID era. They think COVID is a story, but it's not a story. It is killing people and it is real. So a candidate should come out to inform his people, because the public is still trying to learn about this COVID. So a candidate should be able to tell his people that actually COVID exists. If they've told us to wear masks, if they've asked us to be 80 or 70, because his compound, he could argue, seats 90 or 100 people. But can we see them socially distanced? Can we see them wearing masks? Can we see them sanitize? Such that you don't get into run-ons with police. Challenge them on what is existing. And so for us, the statement and the pain that came with the arrests was the inhumane treatment, the brutality, the torture. You see, inhumane, brutality, torture are all against our laws. And I told you, elections are the law. So when you breach the law, then the observer must come out and blow a whistle and say, no, this is overstepping your mandate. Because the process is supposed to be clear. The process is supposed to be peaceful. So Bobi Wine, it is paramount upon him to tell his supporters not to flout the guidelines. Yes. And if he wants to change those guidelines, he should go back to Electoral Commission, sit down with them and tell them, okay, is it possible that if I have a very big compound which can seat 100 people or 500 people, I could go ahead and sit them when they're socially distanced? Could you then talk to the police to understand that position? And then the Electoral Commission will also sit down with the police, because remember, the Electoral Commission has a justice heading that commission. He understands all these laws, and he understands the pressures from both ends.
Yes.
In the earlier time of this election, he assured us, even if they announce today COVID is over, we'll go back to the old election, because he also likes to see Kadodi and people celebrating and people getting into the fanfare of elections.
Yes.
So by the time he's saying that, he's saying, I have also been alerted by the Ministry of Health that there is a health and safety issue. So everybody from wherever, even FDC, as much as they have support, how clever can we engage with our people knowing we have a pandemic and we are going into an election? But also the police, as much as we have to maintain law and order, how do we do it in a human rights-based approach?
All right. Now, speaking also about security, most of the actually all the presidential candidates are given, police cars, patrols, and the like. But some of them have really come out to complain that this, of course, works for the state and it doesn't support or work for them, and they're denying and giving back, saying they cannot use it. For instance, Bobi Wine said he doesn't want the state security. What are your thoughts on the complaints raised by presidential candidates in regards to the security forces given to them?
Bobi Wine gave his explanation. He said, these security people were given to me and they could not defend me at the time when I was being whisked off. And he said even when I got home, they did not defend me. And he also gave a reason that even his people were beaten up at Kamocha and the security still just looked on. How dare you be a security person, and you can't even defend the ordinary.
What are the options? What options do they have in this period?
No, they are supposed to ensure his security. So they were supposed to move in and surround him. We were supposed to see them cause a kind of a ring fence around the candidate and say, no, you can't move in here because we've been given the mandate to protect him. They didn't. They stood by like bystanders. And so he feels, why should I have them? I have them to do what? What are they going to do if they can't guarantee my security? What are they going to do? That is where he's coming from. And that is a very practical point to come from. You think about it humanely. Don't think about it in terms of the election and the judgment of saying this one is opposition and this one is not. No, think about it humanly. He's coming from a very good point. However, that said, he must also remember that there are people who don't support him in an election.
Yes.
There are people who hate him. But as much as they hate him, they can harm him. And so the Electoral Commission is saying, since you're a candidate, we want your security.
We want to protect you.
Yes, exactly. So he should remember that as well. There are those who don't like him, and they are a majority. Yes.
Well, now that the nominations are done and we're entering into a campaign phase, what should candidates know? What are some of those things that they should have at the back of their mind as they go into this phase where they want us citizens to vote for them?
I think it's also good you ask that. Every candidate should get back to their supporters and talk about the issues that have been put out by Electoral Commission in terms of guidelines. Because Electoral Commission, I told you, is headed by a justice who is going to follow the guidelines to the letter. Everything he says must be followed. If it is going to be changed, he must be alerted that this is changing because of this and this. Can you please agree? And he agrees. Because that is his world. His world, even in court, was listen this way, then judge, it is like this. So if any candidate wants to change, to deviate from those guidelines, if they think they're unfair, if they think it's not practicable, especially the one that I raised, the one of where the police has to come to see the venue with the returning officer.